multiculturalism, pluriculturalism, cross-culturalism, transculturalism. We have all these concepts that are based in culture. So we have the main element, culture, and then we have these affixes that broaden the idea of culture and that express other possibilities and other functionalities of culture, combining quantitative prefixes like multi or plural, or qualitative prefixes like intra, cross, inter. So the meanings they create are complex, and some concepts, even linked to the description's effects, are true theories of the preference of certain areas of knowledge. You have already heard lots of times about how we live in a multicultural society. We read it in the newspapers, we hear on television, even in our courses. We live in a multicultural society, as if it is something new. But in fact, the displacement of man in space, as travelers, as conquerors, as settlers, as migrants, as refugees, has always been a constant in the history of mankind. And the result of these movements of displacement is something that is part of the human existential condition. And with it, the encounter between diverse ethnicities and diverse cultures. We know from the beginning of the human evolution that our history as human beings is done because we have, or is characterized by our ability to move. And only in areas we have very important geographical isolationism, that are isolated from the rest of the world, is that we maintain societies that have no interaction with one another, and but these are very rare. And we have to consider that modern societies, we are always talking about the issue of multiculturalism, but the issue of multiculturalism is not new. Of course, it has become more important in the last century and in our century, because we have also the phenomenon of technologies, information technologies, economic globalization, intense migratory flows that increasingly affect our societies and breaking our borders. And if multiculturalism was linked, for example, in the 16th century, with the interrelationship between Europe and its colonial expansion, or political and commercial relations between the various territories. Today, there is, in fact, a process that is of homogenization of the movements of populations, of cultural and religious miscegenation, widespread through the world, mainly in the European area. This places the issue of challenges linked to cultural change and culturally based problems and conflicts belonging to cultural identities, among others. This places this issue as central to our society and to our understanding of society. Uh, we have a part for you to understand more about what is multiculturalism and what is the fact of multiculturalism, the reality of multiculturalism. I'm not talking about a multiculturalism movement or a political view of multiculturalism. I'm talking about the phenomenon of multiculturalism. And I've chosen this image for you to see that in this space, many cultures live. You see, for in a multicultural area, there's not necessarily an interculture relationship. I mean, In a space, many cultures can live, but not necessarily they interact with each other. And we can see that in some countries where you can find communities, they continue to speak their own language, to have their own cultures, to have their gastronomy, etc. But they live in the same space, in the same town, for example, but they have their own roads where they continue to speak their own language and they continue to develop their culture as a group. But there are other concepts that are very important. For example, a person living in a multicultural society can be pluricultural. And I found this drawing for you to understand. This is a person, and the person has these all these colors that represent different cultures or different languages, because you can have the phenomenon, in the case of migrant groups, for example, the phenomenon of pluriculturalism and plurilingualism. Since belonging to a minority, even for the sake of adaptation, there is an adoption of values, beliefs, practices, and language of the host culture. To have interculture, you have to have interculturalism. You have to have a process of interaction and connection based on the relations between peoples and cultures, overcoming the stereotypes, the prejudices of race, religion, gender, ideology. And so each one of these elements is affected by the other element and changes color with the other element. So it corresponds to a culture that is built through cultural contact, involving ethical choices and concerns. We also have in this drawing, this small picture, the idea of transcultural. Transcultural is a definition that appeared in the 40s of the 20th century, and it talks about, it's a synthesis of a kind of message of the present. It's some authors oppose the traditional cultures of nation states, pushing boundaries between them to seek common and past cultural heritage for others, especially in literary science. And the concept is developed as operative in the context of comparative literatures. So transcultural literature is considered by authors to be produced by writers who write at the crossroads of cultural and national boundaries, and their creative production cannot be confined to one culture. Finally, we have interculture and subcultural and cross-cultural. Sorry. So interculture is mostly the communication, is using communication as opposed to intercultural communication. While the latter contemplates communication between subjects of different culture, the former addresses the issue between subjects of the same culture. So, as the prefix indicates, it is something that goes on within the same culture and members share the same conventions. So, communication can be intercultural or intercultural if they are of different cultures. And so, cross-cultural, from the anthropological point of view, is meant any operation aimed at comparing cultures. So it's an effort to understand how different cultures are towards one another or communicate with each other. So here you have the comparison. This one has, this one doesn't have, this one has one, this other has more of these uses, beliefs, values, positions, myths, etc. So you can follow all these things in your handbook, and I hope you can find better pictures than mine. Thank you.